Welcome to American Catechism, episode number 7 for book review number 2. It is May 14th, 2025, and it is 103 degrees here in Fort Worth, Texas. Did you know that in World War II, the two northern corners of North America were occupied by Axis powers of Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany? The island of Attu in the Aleutian Islands off the coast of Alaska was occupied by Japan, and the United States Army had to retake that island. And the shores of eastern Greenland were occupied by the Germans, and the Germans had to be run out of Greenland. And Greenland is a part of North America, technically. This last fall, after the presidential election, President Trump began speaking about Greenland and how vital it was for American security, world peace, and that it was very rich in precious metals. And he was not happy with the way the Danes have been running Greenland. He clearly stated he wanted to take Greenland away from Denmark one way or the other. And this caught a lot of people by surprise. If you want to know some of the reasons why Trump wants Greenland, read this book, Fury and Ice, Greenland, the United States and Germany in World War II by Peter Harmsen. Published in Havertown, Pennsylvania by Casemate, 2024. This is 242 pages and costs $29.17 on Amazon. I read this book January to May of 2025, and I highly recommend it. Now, who should read this book? If you are intrigued by Trump's desires towards Greenland, and then I would say read this book. If you really want to know, I mean, I don't know if Trump and the author talk to each other at all, but there's some remarkable parallels here. Secondly, if you're a World War II buff, read this book, because I've read probably about 100 books on World War II and had never heard of this. So this is a new story. Third, if you love Viking history and want to see how the long view of Viking history has panned out, read this book, because the Vikings discovered Greenland. The author's goal here was to tell the dramatic and complex story of the importance of and the battles for Greenland in World War II. And he seems to be also clearly pointing forward to exactly what President Trump is saying. Greenland is vital for the defense of the West. If you have ever watched a good movie on D-Day, such as The Longest Day, that portrayed the decision-making of General Eisenhower and his questioning of the chief meteorologist about the weather, that decision was made based on weather stations reporting from Greenland. The Nazis knew the importance of Greenland for the weather conditions of Europe, and they determined to emplace their own weather stations on Greenland, hence the battle for Greenland, that Harmsen recounts in great detail and with much excitement and drama. This is a well-written book. This is an exciting read. Harmsen's goal was met right here in this exciting book. He tells the story, he makes it exciting, and he points to the significance of Greenland today. As is usual with most stories, the antecedents stretch back a long time before the action takes place. So he does give a good survey of the political and diplomatic history of the fight for Greenland between the Danes and the Norwegians, stretching back to the early 1800s. And in the first chapter, he does cover some of the history of the discovery of Greenland by the Vikings and North America, and the settlement on Greenland, Eric the Red's land, up through to modern times. And that's a dramatic story as well. Now, he doesn't go into much detail there because it's introductory stuff, but or the story of Greenland, it's got some twists and turns there. He relates a story of a British raid on Greenland during the Napoleonic Wars, because the English and the Danes were on different sides. And he brings up the Monroe Doctrine from President James Monroe, which Trump is now considering in his discussions with Denmark and Greenland. So there's a ton of history in here that, even though it's centuries old, it's very relevant. The different nations involved in the contest for Greenland in the 1930s and 40s include Denmark, Norway, Germany, England, Canada, and finally, late to the fight, the United States. Now, the Norwegians claimed Greenland because their Viking ancestors were the ones who discovered it. But the Danes got control of it because they ruled Norway for centuries. But now that Germany had conquered both Denmark and Norway, the Greenlanders were kind of left in no man's land. The British briefly considered taking it, but they were stretched so thin that then the Canadians thought, well, maybe we should take it. And they actually got ready. I mean, they were like on the boat, headed there. And Roosevelt put the squash on that, though. And then there was some delicate diplomatic balance going on because the Nazis didn't want to take Greenland too soon because they didn't want to, they thought that would drag America into the war. And so also then Roosevelt didn't want to take Greenland too soon because of other diplomatic considerations. But nonetheless, finally the Japanese attack, Germany declares war, we declare war, and so the race for Greenland was on, including the USA. Now, it wasn't just the weather stations on Greenland that were important. Greenland was home to the largest mine for cryolite in the world. What is cryolite? It's a mineral that was essential for the production of aluminum, and now a key component in aircraft manufacturing during the war. And so if you're going to build airplanes, you've got to have aluminum, and you've got to have the cryolite to make the aluminum. Now, the Germans had a type of a method of making aluminum without depending on cryolite, but the Allies depended on that cryolite, and so there was thought of, well, what if the Germans attacked the cryolite mine? And so they offloaded some anti-aircraft guns there, but didn't give them ammunition, or they didn't give them enough parts, or whatever. The anti-aircraft guns there and the anti-ship guns were kind of almost useless. But the author here shows the development of Greenland as a key part also of the aviation routes and shipping lanes from North America to England. Now, Harmsen doesn't keep only at the big scene level for his story. He relies on a lot of personal memoirs for very specific battles that took place in Greenland between the Germans and the Allies, describing the small but deadly fights between small groups of soldiers, numbering between 2 and maybe a dozen. And so dog sleds were used in combat. Dogs were captured. Soldiers were killed. Airplanes were strafing small huts in the middle of ice floes there in Greenland. They built ice bunkers carefully disguised. There were ships getting locked in the ice where they couldn't get out, and then the ships were attacked and they had to sink the ships. There's plenty of tense moments packed into this book. One story that I've known about since I was a kid is the sinking of the SS Dorchester off the Greenland coast in February of 1943, and the 4 chaplains who gave up their life preservers to 4 men who didn't have life preservers, and then they went down with the ship. I read that story when I was a kid, and somehow I didn't remember it being just off the coast of Greenland, but that's in fact what it was. And so there's different times when airplanes had to make an emergency landing. There was airfields made in Greenland. There's some famous stories of flights of aircraft that got lost over Greenland. They landed, they had to be rescued. This book has it all. Harmsen goes into some detail about the effects of the American presence on Greenland with the local Danish population and the Inuit population. So everything from trash dumps that drew the Inuit in to rummage through the trash, and then there was actually an outbreak of food poisoning that killed lots of the natives. There's clothing and music styles, there's STDs and prostitution, mixed marriages, a ton of single moms that came out of all this. There's a lot of social issues that Harmsen deals with here. The long-term establishment of the American military presence for radar stations during the Cold War is also discussed, and that points forward to our day and President Trump. If you may recall, a couple of months ago, Vice President Vance went to Thule, Greenland, and toured the Space Force base that we have there. Used to be an Air Force base. Before that, it was the Army base, Army Air Corps. So, it really does make me wonder if maybe somehow President Trump got an advance copy of this book or spoke with the author. But because the things that Trump and Vance are talking about for Greenland are covered very thoroughly here. And yet in the context of World War II and then the Cold War. So, in conclusion, this book, Fury and Ice, was exciting. It was fact-filled. It was relatively easy to read. Now, the diplomatic history can get a little bit intense there, and so if you don't like those kind of details, well, that may be the most difficult part of the book. But I love those kind of details. I mean, this author can really write, and he gives all these details that I'm looking for and makes it highly exciting and readable. This is really one of the best history books I've read lately. So 5 stars for Fury and Ice by Peter Harmsen. Well, that's it for American Catechism on this second book review out here.